Welcome to the Big Game Hunting Podcast, where we help hunters like you prepare for the big game hunting adventures you've always dreamed of. Now, here's your host, John McAdams.
Hello, John McAdams here, and you are listening to episode 283 of the Big Game Hunting Podcast. I just made it home from an outstanding mule deer hunt in New Mexico with my son. I am not exaggerating when I say that this hunt was one of the most fun hunts I have ever been on. And that is saying something too, because I've been very fortunate to enjoy a lot of great hunts over the years. Now, my son James and I dealt with some wild conditions. We had a lot of fun, and we were ultimately successful in tagging a buck while we were out there. So today's episode is a detailed recap of that hunt, evaluations of some gear that we used, and some of the lessons we learned along the way. Before we get started, make sure you are on my email list. To do that, click the link in the show notes or go to huntingguns101.com and sign up there. You'll get my free ebook on the best hunting cartridges. Plus, you'll also start to receive the emails I send out every weekday. If you like the podcast, you're going to love these emails. These are entertaining and informative emails about hunting, shooting, ballistics, etc. I get feedback all the time from people telling me how much they enjoy receiving those emails and how much they look forward to hearing from me every weekday. So make sure you're getting them too by clicking on the link in the show notes or going to huntingguns101.com and signing up. Okay, let's get started talking about this mule deer hunt, and we'll start from the very beginning. Now, as you may know, I used to live in El Paso. I moved out to East Texas, where I currently live, in 2021, but I was out in El Paso from 2017 to 2021. And I enjoyed some great hunting when I was out there. Now, without going into too much detail, I did quite a bit of hunting in New Mexico while I lived out there. I hunted other states too, Colorado, Wyoming, Arizona, but I lived closest to New Mexico, and so I did the most hunting there. Now, my old college roommate was from El Paso, and he put me in touch with his uncle and some of his uncle's old hunting buddies who recommended that I check out this particular unit. Now, those guys are old enough that they don't hunt too much themselves anymore, but they hunted in that area pretty consistently for about 20 to 30 years, and they had a lot of success out there during that time frame. Now, that unit can best be described as a quote-unquote opportunity unit, where the state issues a lot of tags, and it's not too difficult to draw one. There are some big bucks out there, but it is nowhere on the radar as one of the premier mule deer units in New Mexico or really anywhere else in the state. But it's a nice place to go if you just want to go get a tag that's not super difficult to draw. Go out there, see some deer, maybe shoot something, have a good time. Now, the other nice thing about New Mexico is there's no points there. It's a pure random draw. They break down the applicants into resident, non-resident, and non-resident outfitted pools, and there are different odds for drawing different tags depending on which pool that you're in, resident, non-resident, or non-resident outfitted. But this is a case where, since there's no points, every person that's in the pure non-resident pool has the same odds of drawing a particular tag. So you don't have to worry about getting beat out by someone that has 20 preference points or something like that. And this is also a case where you can draw almost any tag as long as there is a non-resident tag allocated for it. You can draw almost any tag in the state in any given year. This is in stark contrast to a state like Colorado, where there's a lot of units where if you don't have enough points, you have literally 0% odds of drawing it. So that's the nice thing about New Mexico. And like I said, this particular unit, not especially difficult to draw. For instance, I drew tags in this particular unit for the rifle season in 2017 and 2018, and I drew the muzzleloader tag in 2019. I did not apply for deer in 2020 because I was 100% focused on elk for that year. Listen to episode 114 to hear the story of that hunt. I also did not apply for deer in 2021 or 2022 because I moved. Now, I ended up killing a buck in that unit in 2017. Listen to episode 190 for that story. But I saw nice bucks each year, though. I missed a bigger deer in 2018, and I could not get within shooting range of an even bigger deer in 2019. Now, that area also has a lot of javelina, and you can get an over-the-counter javelina tag to hunt that unit, and I ended up killing javelina in that unit in 2020 and 2021. Listen to episode 132 and episode 75 to hear the stories of those hunts. So that area has treated me pretty well over the years, and I've had a lot of success there. Now, those old guys in El Paso gave me enough info to get started, but they hadn't really been out there in a few years when I drew that first tag, and things had changed quite a bit since they did most of their hunting in that unit. But like I said, they got me started, and then once I got out there and just got a foothold in, I did a lot of exploring, a lot of driving, a lot of walking around, and just seeing what I could find, and I've gotten to know that area pretty well over the past few years. It also helps that I'm not afraid to burn some boot leather either, because even though the state issues a lot of tags for that unit, most people stick pretty darn close to the roads. Now, that area has pretty good road access, but there's pretty big tracts of land within it where you have to walk a half mile, 1, 2, 3 miles to get in to the canyons and see what's going on there. So if you're one of these people that's just driving around on the roads or maybe getting out walking 100 yards in glassing, you can cover a lot of ground and see some stuff that way and maybe even kill some deer in there, but there's big percentages of that unit that you just can't access unless you get out and do some walking. But luckily, it's not an especially challenging unit to hunt if you want to do just some minimal walking. Right? You don't need to do a serious backcountry hunt in there. You can car camp close to the road, drive around a little bit, get out, walk a couple miles, come back to the truck, sleep in your tent that night, right next to the truck and all of that stuff. So with all that in mind, even though there's a lot of other hunters out there, I've never had any issues with them messing up my hunt. Right? I'll just see other people camped out along the road as I'm driving around, and I'll occasionally see another hunter while I'm actually out hunting. That's only happened a couple of times, though. But I've never had a serious issue because, like I said, I think most of those hunters are just sticking primarily to the roads, or they're going into places where I've never hunted before. But the good news is I found enough good spots in there over the years that I have a good rotation of different places I can go depending on the time of day, depending on the wind that I can hunt, that I just haven't had people bothering me. And the terrain also isn't too bad in this area either. I would classify it as quote-unquote gently rolling hills. There's some elevation change in there, but it's not excessive. It is not super darn steep either. And like I said, there's good road access out there, so you can drive a couple miles, get out and do a little bit of walking, and cover a lot of ground that way. It's not something that requires horses or 10 miles of walking to get in there to where the animals are. Now, the weather also usually isn't too bad. This hunt took place in October. Different units in different parts of the state will often have a couple of different seasons in October and into November. I think maybe even some of the bow seasons start even in September. But the bottom line is these are not very late season hunts, and so the weather can vary, and we'll talk more about that here in a minute. But October in New Mexico, especially at a moderate altitude like this, 5,700 feet, so it's not super high. It's not at sea level, but it's not super high either. Weather can get cold, but we're not looking usually at a lot of snow or extreme cold weather or anything like that. So the combination of the moderate terrain and the moderate weather, good road access, area that I knew fairly well, I decided, hey, this would be a good spot to take my son. Now, as I record this, my son James is 7 years old. He's a great kid, always wants to join me hunting. Now, I've worked him up to this over the past few years as he's gotten older and more mature and just more capable of doing stuff. We had previously gone whitetail hunting together, and he was with me actually when I shot my doe with a muzzleloader out here in East Texas in 2021. But he's always wanted to join me on some of my more serious hunts, and he actually got mad at me when I went to Arizona last year for elk without him. Now, like I said, he's 7 as I record this. He's very physically fit, and he's a very active little boy. He probably only has something like 3% body fat, and he darn near has a six-pack. So while he doesn't have a lot of, extra bulk or muscle on him, he also doesn't have a lot of fat either. And so he's always getting after it, running around, climbing on things like you'd expect a 7-year-old boy to do. But that said, he's also still only 7, and I wanted to ease him into a more serious hunt before we really go crazy. The last thing I wanted to do was take him on a serious hunt and have him just have it be too hard for him and have him not think it's fun or get burned out or, God forbid, have him get hurt. So I was trying to come up with something that was going to be a good mix of more serious and more exotic than the stuff that we had done in the past, but still something that we could do together, have a reasonable chance of success, reasonable odds of seeing a lot of stuff, just a good mix for a fun, safe, interesting hunt for us to do together. So with all that in mind, I thought that this particular deer hunt in New Mexico would be a good candidate. Right, it was a long but reasonable drive. We could do it in a single day, coming and going. Not crazy terrain. We'd be car camping. There's enough game out there to keep it interesting and all of that stuff. So earlier this year in 2023, I applied for this tag for the first time since 2019. And I drew it. And luckily, New Mexico has one of the earlier draws, and they're good about getting results out pretty early. So we figured out what was going on this year when they announced that we drew the tag, and this hunt became my focus for the fall of 2023. Now, this has been a busy year, right? I went to Africa with a couple podcast listeners earlier this year. We did the Sandhill Crane Hunt with some podcast listeners before that, but this was going to be my focus for the fall. I wanted to make sure that we were as well prepared as we could to have a good time out there. Now, me being the guy that I am, one of the things I'm always thinking about is what gun am I going to take on this hunt? Now, I very seriously considered bringing the Bergara Premier Divide and 6.5 PRC that I have, but I ultimately opted for the Christensen Arms Ridgeline FFT in 7mm PRC. That's the exact same rifle I took to Africa. Left the same scope on it, that Leupold VX5 HD 3-15 by 44mm scope with a fire dot reticle. I was so happy with how that whole setup performed in Africa that I decided it'd be a good candidate to take on this hunt too. I ended up taking the Bergara as a backup hunt. So I took both of them, but the Christensen Arms' 7 PRC was the primary rifle I decided to use. I also opted to use that Hornady Outfitter ammo with the 160 grain CX bullet. Once again, it performed great in Africa. Decided to try it out on this hunt. At this point, ammo options are improving for the 7 PRC, but there still aren't a lot of options out there. And so since that stuff worked well for me, shot well, and it performed well on game, I decided we'll minimize the complications with this stuff as much as I can. Just use the same stuff that I used in Africa. And oh, by the way, that is a left-handed rifle, which is another big bonus in favor of it too. Now, one notable change from the setup I used in Africa was I had a Banish backcountry suppressor I took on this hunt. I had ordered and was just waiting for approval of that suppressor for a long time. Finally got it this summer after I got back from Africa, and I decided this would be a perfect opportunity to use it. That suppressor was just almost made for this sort of hunting. And also, like I had used on previous hunts, I used the same Spartan Precision Pro Hunt bipod and their Ascent tripod. I used that tripod both for glassing and for shooting. More on that later. Now, just like I had mentioned previously in my podcast talking about prepping for the Africa hunt, that rig shot lights out, easily sub-MOA. I used the lab radar to verify my muzzle velocities, used the Hornady FordOff app to get my dope out to 500 yards, and then I spent a lot of time working with it at the range. From a variety of shooting positions, prone, sitting, standing, using various means of support. And the local shooting range that I do a lot of shooting at goes out to 500 yards. And so I was shooting at 200, at 300, at 400, and at 500 yards getting ready for this hunt. I ended my last range session before the hunt with a 10-shot string of 10 hits to the vitals of a feral hog-shaped steel plate at 500 yards. And man, that felt good. Doing something like that and just shooting what is still a great group at 500 yards over and over and over again is great for the confidence. So I was feeling great about this rifle setup that I was taking on the hunt with the rifle, the scope, ammo, all of that stuff. Now, because I was having a hunting buddy on this hunt, I needed to get him something to do too out there. Now, I have my Vortex range-finding binoculars that I carry in my chest rig, and I've done that I think since I bought him in 2019, but I needed to get him some binoculars. So I got him a set of Ride-On 10 by 42 millimeter HD binoculars, and I got him set up with my old Vortex tripod that I used to use before I got this new Spartan Precision tripod. I showed him how to set it up, got all the stuff ready, got him all set up, showed him how to use it to glass and all of that, and he was really excited about that. Those binoculars are a good size for a little guy like him. Plus, they're also just really darn good binoculars, too. They're not very expensive, they're not very big, but they have pretty darn good optical capability. Now, of note, in addition to the Vortex binoculars, I also brought my Leupold BX5 Santium binoculars. Those are some 15 by 56 millimeter binoculars. With my experience that I'd had in this area and just knowing what it's like out there in the typical ranges that I'm messing with and whatnot, I decided I was going to go with the 10 by 42s and the 15 by 56s and not bring a spotting scope out there. I had a lot of success doing it this way in the past, seen a lot of deer that way, and those Santiums are almost perfect for this sort of terrain where they got a really wide field of view, good image quality, actually great image quality, and then enough magnification. There's a big bump up from the 10 power binoculars where I can spot and, most importantly, as we'll talk about later, identify game at extended range with it without having to mess around with a spotting scope out there. Now, because we were going to be car camping and using that vehicle for a lot of transportation out there and just doing a couple of miles worth of walking during the day, I brought my EXO K4 backpack like I usually do on these hunts, and I'd have it loaded up with all of the stuff that I needed for really a day of hunting with food and water and my binoculars and rain gear, etc., etc. I carried that, and then I had my son just carrying an old Badlands day pack with just the odds and ends that he needed. I had him carrying his own food and binoculars and whatnot out there, and it was big enough for that, but without being excessively large that he was having a hard time carrying it. Now, this tag that I drew was good for a 5-day rifle season. That is pretty typical with a lot of the rifle and muzzleloader hunts in New Mexico. There are exceptions, of course, but in most of the units where they issue most of the tags, it's a 5-day season for rifle and for muzzleloader, for elk or for deer, depending on which one you end up getting. So the season started on Saturday and it would go through Wednesday. With that in mind, we decided, okay, we're going to leave on Friday early in the morning, spend all day driving out there, get out there Friday night, get set up. Then we'll hunt through Wednesday and either go home on Thursday or when we shoot something, because it's a 1 deer tag that I have, good for a fork antlered deer. So I couldn't shoot a spike, but I could shoot basically any other buck. Now, the rub with this particular hunt, and this is the case almost every single year, the exact dates of the hunt vary, but almost every single year this hunt overlaps with Halloween. Sometimes it starts a little earlier or a little later or whatnot. Like the year I shot that deer out there in 2017, the last day of the hunt was Halloween. And so I ended up coming home on Halloween day that day. I shot my deer that day. Well, this year in 2023, Halloween fell on a Tuesday. Me, if I missed trick-or-treating, oh well, not the end of the world, but Halloween was very important to my son. He wanted to go trick-or-treating. And so in the lead up to the hunt, he and I were talking about this. And I was like, listen, James, what do you want to do? You know, Halloween's right in the middle of the hunt. It's going to take us really a full day to get home when we decide to leave, whenever that is. Obviously, if we shoot something early in the hunt, we'll get back home and we'll get you back here in time to go trick-or-treating. But what if, say, Tuesday comes around and we haven't killed anything yet? Do you want to keep hunting, or do you want to, go home and go trick-or-treating? It's up to you, right? We'll do the best we can, but I'm not going to hold you out there against your will and make you feel like you got gypped out of Halloween this year and you're trick-or-treating if that is something that's important to you. And he's like, well, Dad, I think we should just kill something before Halloween and then we'll get to do both. And I was like, well, that's the plan, but who knows how things are going to go out there. We may run into some weather. We may just have some bad luck. What do you want to do? What is most important to you? Do you want to go trick-or-treating, or you want to go hunting and make the most of the entire 5-day season? And he's like, well, let me think about it. And, he was conflicted about it, and I could tell that he wanted to hunt all 5 days, but it was also really important for him to be home for Halloween. I said, okay, listen, we'll just take it as it comes out there. And if you change your mind, you just let me know, and we'll go home for Halloween, regardless if we shot anything or not. Now, it's also worth noting that in the past, this was a unit where you could hunt javelina during the deer season or the elk season. Now, this is not the case anymore. They changed it this year in 2023. But in the past, you could buy a over-the-counter javelina tag and just have it in your pocket, and it would be good for the deer or elk season, depending on which one you drew. And you could hunt a javelina using that tag during the dates of your deer or your elk season within the confines of both the season dates and the method of take restrictions for that season. So if you drew a muzzleloader tag, you could hunt javelina then and shoot it with a muzzleloader during the dates of your deer season if you wanted to. Or, failing that, you could go back out during the javelina season in January, February, and March and use it then. So every year that I'd gone out there, I'd seen a lot of javelina. And I had always considered getting a javelina tag to go out there. And I actually ended up doing that in 2019. And as luck would have it, I didn't end up killing anything on that hunt. But I went back out there later in early 2020 and I ended up killing a javelina during the dedicated javelina season. So that was always, something that was kind of a cool opportunity to have, right? You could have both of these tags and you could shoot a javelina or you could shoot a deer depending on, just how things go out there. And so I was talking to James about that and I was like, well, do you want me to get a javelina tag? And, we can shoot one of those if we see one. He's like, oh yeah, definitely, Dad, you can do that. And I was like, oh yeah, that'll be cool. We could shoot a deer or a javelina. And he's like, well, what if we shoot both, Dad? And I was like, well, okay, that's possible. That's possible. We can do that. He's an optimistic and enthusiastic guy. And I love that about him. Now, fortunately, I went through the regulations in New Mexico just to brush up on them and see if anything changed in the couple of years that I had been out of the state and had been hunting there. And I saw that they actually changed that policy on the javelina. I called up New Mexico Fish and Game, and the guy I talked to there said that they were trying to reduce the javelina population for the last couple of years, so they were offering those additional javelina hunting opportunities. They got the population where they wanted it to be, and so they took away those opportunities starting this year for people to hunt them during the deer and the elk season. They still have the over-the-counter tags, and they still have the javelina season in January, February, and March, depending on which tag and what part of the state you're in. But luckily, I saw what the deal was with that, so I didn't buy a tag, and I didn't end up shooting a javelina out there because that would have been an awkward conversation with the game warden wanting to explain why the heck I'd shot this javelina during deer season when I couldn't do that anymore. So I gave him the bad news, and I said, hey, as it turns out, they changed the rules. We can't shoot a javelina, so we're just going to focus on deer. And he was disappointed, but that's the way it is, and he and I rolled with it and went out there and we started our hunt. So we drove out on Friday, like I said, left early in the morning, drove across the state of Texas and into New Mexico that day, got there in the late afternoon, got set up with our campsite and our tent and whatnot, and had dinner, got everything ready to go out the next day, and I had a plan. Okay, this is my favorite spot that I like to go in the morning. The wind's looking like it's going to be good for it, and we'll get everything ready to go, and we'll go out there and hike out early before light. So we'll be setting on this canyon rim before the sun comes up, and we'll be just ready to go. Now, as is typical at this time of year in New Mexico, temperatures were pretty warm. I think it got down into the 60s that night, 60 degree Fahrenheit. And then during the day, it was, like up in the 80s, mid 80s. So pretty darn warm, sunny, and dry. Got down into the 60s, like I said, that night, slept real well, got up early, had breakfast, drove out to where we were going to hunt that first morning, got out, started walking, had a little bit more than a mile hike to get out there, get set up for exactly where I want to be. Sun starts coming up, I'm looking around, and there are cows everywhere. And when I say cows, I mean moo cows. And that is something that happens out in this area. It's national forest land that we were on, and people that are ranchers out there pay for the grazing rights in certain parts of the forest. And sometimes I'll go out and hunt a canyon looking for deer, and it'll be full of cows. Some years I've been out there, haven't seen a single head of cattle the entire time. Other times, like this year, I'll go out there in the canyon, just everywhere I look, there's cows, 20, 30 cows, all in there. Every time I see something that's moving, it's a darn cow. And then, they start mooing and moving around and all of that stuff. And I don't know if it really bothers the deer that much, but I have noticed that I have not seen as many deer in those particular areas where there's lots of cows, even if it's a good spot. So that was kind of frustrating. We ended up seeing, I think, 5 does and fawns that morning, though. So there were some deer in there. Saw some way out, maybe 1,000, 1,200 yards away, way at the other end of the canyon. And then another couple of them a lot closer to us. And I got James on the ones that were close to us. They were 200, 300 yards away. And, was able to look at them, and, that was cool, whatnot. And so it wasn't a total bust that morning, but it was a little frustrating getting out there. But I said, you know what, that's how it goes. Part of the deal with going out and hunting in these places is you just got to find where the deer aren't. So we checked out this spot. We're not coming back here, but we got lots of other spots we can go to. We'll go check them out too. So hiked all over in that area that morning just to see if there were any deer in there that we hadn't already seen. Just cows everywhere, though. So we packed up, went back to the truck late morning. On the drive out, we bumped into a big herd of javelina. And so my streak continues where I have still never hunted that place where I did not see javelina. And it was really cool getting to see them. They were pretty close to us. James actually spotted them first, so that was really cool, very interesting for him. And seeing all sorts of wildlife out there. And it's still just the first morning. Go back to camp. Have lunch, just kind of relax a little bit, let him unwind. He had been real good, cooped up in the car the previous day and was doing his best to be quiet and still that morning. So he was just running around being a crazy little wild man like he likes to be sometimes around camp. Went back out, hunted a different spot, my favorite afternoon spot that afternoon. And unfortunately, there was a bunch of cows there too. Didn't see any deer. Okay, no big deal. Tomorrow's a new day. We can look at some other options for tomorrow. And I had some other spots picked out that were good options that I had actually found on a previous hunt when this canyon, that was my favorite, had a bunch of cows in it, went and found another spot, saw some deer there. So, okay, that's where we're going to go tomorrow. And I knew that there was a forecast that there was going to be a cold front come through that next day. So it was in the 80s this day as a high. It was supposed to drop down into the 30s and 40s. So it wasn't supposed to be super cold, but a lot different. And the wind was supposed to change. It was supposed to be out of the north. Great, no problem. So we go to sleep that night. I wake up real early the next morning, like 4:30, like I planned on. Wake up, and it's just misting rain. And it was pretty cold, too. I think it was about 35 degrees that morning Fahrenheit. So just a little bit above freezing, but like I said, just misting rain. I was like, gosh, this isn't going to be fun. And as I was just looking out, sticking my head around the tent, it was like a thick fog that was around us. And I could only see 200 yards. And so I was like, well, let's just hold off on this for right now. Maybe it'll burn off when the sun comes up in the morning. No sense in messing around out there, getting wet, and getting really cold and all that stuff, especially when I got James with me, especially if we can't see but 200 yards anyway. And so, keep periodically checking all through the morning. The sun comes up and it just didn't change. And it's just misting rain all morning long. And every time I check, just more and more of the same. And if anything, the visibility just is decreasing and the temperature is decreasing. Now that was pretty darn frustrating for me. The weather forecast for that day said that there was supposed to be a cold front that came through with some clouds and some lower temperatures, but it wasn't supposed to rain. And it was really weird. I was looking on my phone on the weather app on it. It's got the dot on it on the map in the app for where I am. And it's like, yep, no rain where you are today, just some clouds. And it's, like I said, it's supposed to get down into the 30s. And it's already below where the weather forecast for the low after the cold front came through was supposed to be. And I was just looking at it, I was like, man, this app is not right. Something is not right here. And even though it's clearly raining and foggy where I am, it's showing the green and the yellow rain and whatnot just maybe 20 miles to the east of me, but not where we are. It's like, this isn't right. But this is one of those things that we were in the middle of a giant national forest and at a much different elevation than all of the other weather stations around. The closest weather station was maybe 30 miles away. And like I said, we were 2,000 or 3,000 feet higher than those other weather stations. So I think it was just messing up the weather forecast for the area. But it was one of those things too that no matter what the phone or the weather app says, like the weather is what it is, right? You got to deal with it, and there's nothing you can do about it to change it. And so, we waited all morning and nothing changed. Like I said, it was getting, just raining even heavier and getting foggier and getting colder all day. So we got in the truck and we drove around that day, and we were looking at different spots and whatnot. And by about noon that day, the actual temperature, according to the thermometer on my truck, dropped below freezing and just kept going all day long. And we drove around, and I just wanted to be ready to go in case we got a break in the weather so I could go out there and do some hunting. But like I said, I did not want to get out there, one, for myself and especially for my son, with it being that cold and wet, especially if I just couldn't see anything. And so we drove around, checked out some other spots, and did not see anything moving at all, but we also just couldn't hardly see anything either. And even though I wanted it to clear up and I wanted it to be ready, we were both getting really frustrated. And I thought, you know what, let's drive into town. And I held off on doing that for a long time because I was hoping that it would break and maybe I'd be able to hunt in the afternoon, but it wasn't looking like it was going to change. So we drove into town and we got some McDonald's and filled up on gas and got some other groceries and whatnot, just kind of reset our minds and everything. And that was a nice diversion from things. And doing that ate up just about the entire afternoon. It was almost 2 hours to get into town, a little bit of time there to eat and mess around and get gas and whatnot, and about 2 hours back. Now, by the time we got back, it was even colder. It was getting down into the mid-20s, and there was ice all over everything because it had been raining all day, and then it was starting to freeze, and so it was a little bit of a dicey drive getting back up there, but I was careful when we made it back into camp, no problem. And then just, watched a little bit of movies on the iPad and read and whatnot. Went to bed early that night, and I was hoping that tomorrow was going to be a lot better. Well, woke up at 1 o'clock in the morning to go to the bathroom, and when I went out, it was cold, but it had cleared up, and I could see a lot further away that night, and it was like, okay, perfect. This is going to be a big improvement over what it was yesterday. It's a lot colder. Wind is out of the north. It's steady, but not excessive. The fog is gone. It's not raining anymore. Those animals were probably not doing too much yesterday with the rough weather. They're going to be up and moving today. So this is going to be great, even though it's really cold. And it was a lot colder. Remember, it had dropped from the mid-80s down well below freezing at this point and continued to do so throughout the night. That cloud cover was gone, no insulation out there like that, and it was getting colder and colder and colder. So big change like that. Went back to bed, woke up with my alarm that morning, and remember, it rained all that previous day, just a little bit of rain. Like I said, misting rain, but everything was wet. And so then when it dropped below freezing, everything froze. And it had been coming out of the north, so the north side of everything in particular was just covered in ice. The door to our tent was covered in ice. I had to break the ice off of the tent to get out of the tent in the morning, and the whole north side of my truck, which to include the doors and the windows, was completely frozen in ice too. I had to force the doors open and break big chunks of ice off of the doors so we could get into our car that morning. And so I used our propane stove, heated up some hot chocolate and some coffee for us, and turned on the car. We kind of warmed up that morning, and James and I had breakfast, and I was like, okay, man, like it's going to be cold, but today's going to be a good day. We're going to go out there, and today is the day we're going to kill something, James. I know it's going to happen. Now, he and I had talked extensively, on the drive there and the two previous days there, just about how to be safe and comfortable when you're outdoors like that. It's like, we're going to be in a spot where there's no electricity. We're not going to be able to take a hot shower or anything like that. We got to be on our toes and being careful about staying warm and dry when we're out here. We're talking about hypothermia and all of that, and how it can be dangerous, and even just beyond being dangerous, it's also just not comfortable to be cold. And so we talked a lot about staying dry and dressing appropriately for the weather conditions and all of that stuff. And, based upon how cold it was and whatnot, I was helping him pick out clothes and getting dressed and everything in different layerings of different types of clothing so we could stay warm and safe and comfortable out there. So I got them all bundled up that morning, wearing the right stuff, and right, same thing with me. I got all my Sitka gear out there. I got all my Army long underwear that I had from back when I was in the Army, all the cold weather gear from that. I got some new Kinetrek Mountain Extreme insulated boots, which I was wearing. This is the first hunt I was using them on. They worked great. My feet felt great out there. And the thermometer on my car that morning actually said it got down to 20 degrees Fahrenheit. So that's like 6 or 7 degrees below 0 Celsius. So it was pretty darn cold out there, especially considering how warm it had been just a couple days previously. It dropped a lot when that cold front came through. But we were both doing really good. We were properly equipped, properly dressed for it. And so we drive out to where we're going to hunt that morning. My favorite canyon is perfect when you have a north wind, which is what we had that day. And it's not that long of a walk from the truck either. So we drive out to where we're going to go, park, get everything unloaded. And I'm constantly asking James, hey, man, you feeling good? Are you warm? You doing okay? And he's like, yeah, Dad, I'm fine. Let's go. I'm ready to hunt. Load up all our stuff. Walk out just under a half a mile to where we're going to glass that morning, get set up, get there just a little bit before the sun comes up and start glassing. I get him fixed up, and I got him a nice, both of us actually, nice little Thermarest seat cushions for us to sit on the ground, so keep our bottoms warm, keep us dry from all that stuff. So I get him set up on that, and then we start glassing. And unfortunately, the cows also thought this was a perfect part of the canyon to be in that morning too. Just cows everywhere. Cows, cows, cows. Not seeing any deer. And we'd been there maybe 30 minutes when James gets up and starts hobbling around and acting all weird. And I'm like, hey man, are you okay? And he's like, Dad, I can't feel my feet. And he starts getting kind of upset and starting what looks like panicking. He's like, Dad, I think I'm getting frostbite in my feet. And I'm like, are you getting frostbite in your feet already? You told me everything was fine when we left the truck. And then when we got here, we've been here 10 minutes. No, Dad, I can't feel my feet. They feel really weird and they're tingling and stuff. I think I'm getting frostbite. I want to go back to the truck right now. I'm like, oh, gosh, James. And I'm trying not to get mad at him. I was like, I think your feet just fell asleep. You were sitting cross-legged on the ground, really weird, and I think they just fell asleep. I don't think you're getting frostbite in them. You said everything was fine a minute ago. Dad, I think I'm getting frostbite. Let's go back to the truck. I need to warm up. Okay, fine. Pack up all our stuff, walk back to the truck, and magically, after a couple minutes of walking, his feet start feeling better. So they had just fallen asleep like I thought they did. And everything was fine. No frostbite. I said, okay, no, it's okay, James. I'm not mad at you. I don't think there's any deer here anyway. Just a lot of cows. Let's move to a different spot and we'll check out some other spot and we'll warm up in the truck. It's going to be fine. Get back to the truck, get loaded up. And then we slowly start moving down the road and I see something moving out to the left. And I stop, pull up my binoculars. And it turns out it's 3 elk cows. Now, I knew there were elk in this area. I knew they had a hunting season for them. I'd seen their scat and their tracks out there. I'd even heard a bull bugle way back in September, the first year I ever went out there. I took my wife and James camping just to check the place out. And we heard a bull bugling just a couple hundred yards away. So that was all really cool. But I had never seen an elk with my own eyes until this point. So that was really cool. James and I watched them for a couple minutes. So at this point, we'd seen a couple deer. We'd seen some javelina. We had seen some elk. And so even though it was a little bit frustrating, we're seeing stuff. And there's clearly animals out there. And that's very interesting. And it's always cool to see stuff, even if you're not hunting it. Drive down the road a little bit farther. And I could see that we're approaching a little bit of a plateau. And if we get out of the car here and walk a couple hundred yards, it might be a good spot where we can glass off of it into some other parts of the canyon we hadn't looked at before. And I'd actually never checked out this particular spot in any of my previous hunts there. So I said, okay, James, let's get out of the car. I'm not going to take our backpacks or anything. I'm just going to take my rifle and binoculars and tripod, and we'll just walk out a couple hundred yards here and see what the deal is. Okay, no problem. Get out. We start walking. And remember, I said everything was covered in ice out here. And that means everything. The trees had ice on them. And this part of New Mexico has a lot of rocks in it. Just rocks of varying sizes scattered all over the ground. Some of them really big. Well, we got to one of these really big rocks that was kind of flat. And I wasn't paying attention. And this thing was covered in ice. And I slipped and I fell on it. Now, to give you an idea of what it was like, picture the scene from Home Alone where Kevin McAllister pours water all over the steps, and as the burglars are breaking into the house, they slip on this ice and flip up in the air and come down on their back and all of that stuff. That's about what I look like when I slipped on this ice. I slipped and I just ate it hard. And I'm lying there just moaning on the ground. Oh, gosh. I didn't hurt myself that bad, as it turned out, but I just knocked the heck out of myself. I knocked the wind out of myself. And so I'm just rolling around trying to recover from it. And James is like, Dad, are you okay? Do I need to go get help? Do I need to push the button on the inReach? To back up a little bit, our first day when we got out there, I went over a bunch of things with him, a bunch of rules to keep him safe and all of that stuff and how important it is for him to listen and this is what you should do in this situation and all of that. And I also showed him my inReach. I told him, hey, this is where I keep my inReach. And this is something that we can use to call for help. So if I fall down and I hit my head and I'm not responding, or something crazy happens to me, I get bitten by a snake and I'm there, but I'm clearly hurt and I can't do anything and I can't talk. This is where I keep my inReach in my backpack. This is how you use it. You flip this cover up and you just hold down the SOS button and someone is going to come and help us. You just stay with me. This is how you do it. But don't worry, this is only if something really, really bad happens. Well, he saw me fall down and just eat it like that. And even though I wasn't unconscious or anything, it looked in his little mind that I was hurt bad enough that he needed to hit the inReach and call for help. I was like, no, it's fine, James. Just give me a second. We don't need to hit the inReach. And I get up and I'm okay. I was like, all right, let's just go back to the truck. Well, unfortunately, when I fell like that, I fell on top of my rifle. I had it slung over my shoulder. When I just flipped up in the air, went down on top of it, I smashed my rifle and my scope between this giant rock on the ground and the rest of my body. And I fell hard on this thing. And there was a big gash on the top of the scope where it banged onto the rock. And I was thinking to myself, oh gosh, man, like I kind of wish I would have gotten banged up a little bit more and the scope got banged up a little bit less, because I was totally fine. 5 minutes later, I got my breath back. Everything was fine. But I was not sure about the scope, though. And I was like, man, looking at this thing, I can adjust the zoom fine. I can adjust the parallax fine. I can adjust the elevation and windage turrets fine. But I don't know if I knocked it off a zero or damaged it in any way that's not immediately obvious, just looking at it and making adjustments to it. All right, James, we got to go back to camp and we got to go check this thing out and verify that this darn scope is still zeroed. So we get loaded back up in the truck, start driving back to camp. And my plan was that we were camped pretty close to a big road, but on the other side of camp, away from the road, there was a big canyon there that looked like, if I remembered right, that it would be a good spot where we could safely shoot, set up a target there, and verify that the rifle was still zeroed. So driving out, we saw some people at another campground not too far from where our camp was. So I drove over there and I was talking to him a little bit. And it was a guy and his wife, and it looked like an adult son that were there. And I was talking to them, and they were having a lot of the same frustrations we were, seeing a bunch of cows, some does, that sort of thing. But nothing really worth getting excited about. And they looked like they were New Mexico residents that had hunted this area a lot. And they were saying, yeah, same sort of stuff you hear just talking to random people. It gets worse every year. I'm real frustrated with this, especially the weather and the cows and all that. And yeah, man, I feel your pain, buddy. Oh, well, good luck to you guys. I'll see you later. And so they were camped maybe 400 or 500 yards away from our camp. Keep driving down the road, get back to our campsite. Get out, and I start looking in this canyon, and I wanted to make sure that, one, there was no people in it or anything, and maybe pick out a spot where I could set up a target a good distance away and just verify that the rifle was still zeroed. Well, as I was looking around, I saw something that just didn't look right through my binoculars. I'm like, what the heck is that? And it was a good way away. It was I ranged it later, it was about 820 yards away from me. And I went back to the truck, got my tripod, set up the Santium binoculars on it, and I started looking. I was like, holy cow, that's a deer. And it was a deer bedded under a juniper tree. But this was a south and east facing slope. It was still the morning, and he was bedded kind of underneath the tree, but in the sun, like right next to the tree. So it was cold. He was trying to gather some sun that morning. And I start looking at him, and I pull up James. I get him set up on his binoculars. It's like, hey, man, that's cool. This is a deer there. And he turned his head. And, oh, it's a buck. No, it's a branch antler buck, too. Like, okay, we could shoot this deer. And I'm trying to make a plan, trying to decide what we're going to do. And I hear some noises on the road behind me. We're about 100 yards away from the road, but you can see the road, and you can see us from the road where we were. And I look, and it's that vehicle from the campground where the people we were just talking to were. And they drove by, and they do the thing that you hate to see when you're hunting private land like that and you're looking at an animal, where they drive by and then you see them slow down and stop, and then the truck starts backing up, and then they stop, and then they get out and they start looking with their binoculars where we're looking. I was like, oh, darn it. Like, they saw us looking at this darn deer here, and now they see it. And then I see them like hurriedly talking, and one of them grabs a rifle out, and they start going down into this canyon in front of us to make a stalk on this deer. And I was like, well, we can't shoot now, James. We can't shoot safely at a target down there, and we can't make a move on this deer. They're moving on it first. Oh, well, let's just see what happens. And so we sit there for a couple minutes looking through our binoculars, and we see this deer stand up and stretch and start moving around and eating some berries off of this juniper tree. And we see some other movement, and it turns out there was another deer that was in there that we didn't originally see. And they get up and they start messing around, and actually it was kind of cool. They start fighting each other a little bit, just kind of some good-natured tussling, not a full-blown knockdown, drag-out fight or anything. We're still probably a couple weeks away from the rut starting. These two bucks are pretty similar in size, at least from what we can see from this far away through our binoculars. Both, I don't know, maybe 2.5, maybe 3.5-year-old deer, legal bucks, not especially big, but not really small either. But it's kind of hard to see. We're far enough away, and the angles are kind of weird that I can tell that there's several points. Each of these deer has several points on each side, but I'm not exactly sure. But they're not giant bucks either. They're very similar in size and almost maybe like they're brothers or cousins or something. Certainly look like the same age cohort deer. So they mess around a little bit in there, and they eat a little bit, and just being very casual, not a care in the world. They clearly don't know that we're there, and so I'll look at them, and I'll look at the guys approaching down the canyon, and just kind of going back and forth. One of the deer just kind of moves off casually and disappears. The other one eats a little bit, lays back down pretty close to where I originally saw him. These guys cross the canyon and get above the deer, and I could see that they're looking for the deer, but I don't think they can actually see it from where they are down there. Well, unfortunately for those hunters, the wind was blowing from right to left down the canyon, and these guys got upwind of the deer. Maybe they didn't know, maybe they weren't paying attention, maybe they didn't care, but they get upwind of this deer. The deer, after a couple minutes, I see him react like he smelled them. He got up and briskly, but not real hurriedly, gets up and just walks away. Goes up the canyon to our left, away from us, away from those hunters. Now, part of the problem was the hunters didn't see the deer, and so they didn't know immediately what happened. So they didn't know that the deer was gone, and so they weren't in a hurry to leave. So I'm thinking to myself that we're a little bit on the clock here. We don't have a ton of time to mess around. I really want to verify the zero on my rifle, but I don't know when these guys are going to leave the canyon and make it safe for me to shoot again. So I thought, okay, I've hunted out here before. I used to camp at another spot up the road, and there was also a spot up there where I could safely shoot. All right, James, let's get in the truck. We'll drive up there. I'll shoot at that spot, and then we'll make a plan for the afternoon based upon how that goes. Now, the previous day, when we just kind of sat in the camp all day, just staring at the wall, he and I had a talk. He was getting a little bit homesick. He wanted to go home and see Mom and see his sister, go trick-or-treating on Halloween, which is Tuesday. So this is Monday right now, and he wants to be home on Tuesday. And I said, okay, James, that's no problem. You want to be home to trick-or-treat, if that's important to you, one way or another, I'll get you there in time. So we're going to hunt real hard today, do everything we can to get a deer. Then we're going to leave early tomorrow morning and be home to trick-or-treat. I said, okay, Dad, that's great. We're going to do it. Today's going to be the day that we get this deer. So we got half a day left to do this. So load up, get in the truck. We start driving down this road up towards the direction where the deer went and the direction where this other spot that I could shoot was. Now, the canyon continues to parallel the road as we go up this direction, and it actually gets a little bit more narrow. So while at camp we're looking across and it's 800, 900 yards wide, it's considerably smaller as you continue to go up the road in this direction that we were going. Now, like I mentioned, it had cleared up and it was a beautiful day. Very sunny day, still a little chilly, still below freezing at this point, but gradually warming up as the day goes on. And so those deer were on the south and east slopes catching that morning sun when we saw them. Now, the canyon gets more narrow, and instead of being 800 or 900 yards wide, a mile up the road, it's maybe 500 yards wide or 400 yards wide. And so we get up there, keep going, and I'm just looking out the windows, seeing what's going on, and I just see something that looks a little bit off on the other side of the canyon out to my right as we're going up the road. So I stop and I look with my binoculars, and I can't really make out what the deal is, but it still looks kind of weird through my 10-power binoculars. I get out with my tripod with my 15-power Santiums, and I look, and I'm thinking, that looks like a darn deer bedded under this tree again. As I look at this deer for another minute or so. It turns its head and confirms that it was a deer that I was looking at and not just a weird piece of grass or something. And I can see antlers on it. Okay, so we got a deer here, and I range it, and it's 450 yards away. All right, James, I think we're in business now. Let's see if we can make a move on this deer without someone sneaking in here before we do. So remember, we're over a mile up the canyon at this point, long gone from the people that were down at that other camp, and no sign of them coming our way. So I get James out, get my rifle, his tripod, my tripod, and my shooting bag. I figure we're going to put a quick stalk on this deer and see how close we can get to him, see if I can get a shot on him. And I don't want a bunch of stuff with this. I figure it's going to be quick and down and dirty, whichever way it works out. So get out very quietly, carefully, close the doors. And this area, I would not say that it is thickly vegetated. You get in certain lanes, especially kind of up high, looking across the canyon like we were, you can see several hundred yards. You can see a couple miles in some places. But you get down into that vegetation, you can only maybe see 50 yards in any given direction, kind of on the same level there. So we got these bushes and small trees, got pinyon pine trees, juniper trees, and some other bushes and whatnot interspersed in there every couple of yards. So it's not real thick, not real tough going through it. And it was actually a real good balance that worked out well for us here, because I could put a big tree between us and the deer, walk up straight to it, and then peek around the side and see where the deer are. So I could use that vegetation to screen our movements, but it also wasn't super hard to just look around and make sure that they were still there. And I'd look around, okay, they're still there. All right, let's go around the other side of this tree, get down low, move up to another 5-10 yards to the next one, and look around and get a line on them. So we were able to pretty well close the distance on these deer, and I originally spotted them at around 450 yards, not too far from the truck. And it had just so happened that when I was driving, I saw the weird thing on the other side of the canyon that turned out to be the deer as I was moving by, and I stopped. And when I stopped behind a big tree that was between the truck and the deer. And then I got out and looked, and so it just so happened that big tree was obscuring the view of the truck from the deer, and it didn't even look like it knew that we were there. The wind was good. It was blowing from right to left, so we had a good crosswind. It was not very strong, but it was blowing in a good direction, so it wasn't going to smell us. It wasn't going to see the truck the way it was, and there was enough vegetation in there that James and I could make our approach on this deer without it seeing us either. And so we're gradually moving up, closing the distance from 450 yards to we're around maybe 350, 360 yards. And I could see the deer as we peek around this juniper tree. And by this point, the deer is up and feeding. And another deer that I didn't initially see from this point was with it as well. And they were both up just eating juniper berries off of this tree that was close to them. I thought, okay, they're nice and calm. They don't act like they know we're here. I'm going to try and shoot from a sitting position right here. So I get my tripod out and get my rifle set up on it. And I'm just not happy with how it is. While I can see the deer pretty well, there are some bushes kind of peeking up into my line of sight and my shooting lane from the bottom. And there's no feasible way for me in this particular spot to get a 100% clear shooting lane. So it's okay, no problem. Deer don't know we're here, James. Let's keep moving. We'll get closer. We'll see if I can find a better spot. So I move up and then to the left, and I actually get out into a perfect little open area there that is a nice spot for me to sit down, once again, from a sitting position, and then get a clear line on these deer. And so I can see them, and I can see a good distance around above, below, and left and right to them if they move. All right, man, this is perfect, James. I range them 330 yards to the closest one. They were both just meandering around, eating berries off of this tree. You know, like I said, everything on the north side of everything was all frozen, but everything on the south and the east sides of all the plants was starting to melt by this point because it was getting direct sunlight. And so they were on the south and the east side of this juniper tree eating the berries off of it because those are the ones that weren't frozen. So it worked perfect that the side that they were eating on was the side that we were on relative to them. So I get set up, sitting with my rifle resting on my Spartan Precision Ascent tripod. James is sitting a few yards to my right, just peeking around one of the big trees there, looking at the deer with his binoculars, just freehanding him. But they're close enough where James can see him pretty well without a tripod. Now, I'm using both tripods myself. I have one tripod, the Spartan Ascent tripod, in the front as a front rest, using that adapter like what the Davros had on my rifle. I have his tripod behind me, and I'm using that as a rear rest. As I was getting prepared for this hunt, I ran across a very interesting YouTube video with the guys from Born and Raised Outdoors, where they had a competitive shooter out in the field hunting with them, and the guy was instructing them on different ways that they could get steady in a seated position to shoot at game. One of the tricks that he used was, if you're with a buddy and the buddy has a tripod, you can set that tripod up behind you and then grasp the butt of your rifle and the leg of that tripod at the same time to form an almost rock steady position when you're getting ready to shoot at something. I had practiced this at home dry firing and at the range, and it had worked perfectly. I was amazed at how well it worked. It was almost as steady as shooting off a bench. The downside of it is it takes a little bit of time to set up, and you have to have two tripods out there with you. So if you're hunting by yourself or something, obviously it's not practical to have two tripods, but since I had one for myself to glass off of and then one for James, we had two out there anyway, and so I just decided to use his. So get set up like that, almost perfectly solid, looking at these deer, and like I said, the deer are almost identical in size. So it's not really a matter of picking the biggest one, it's just a matter of picking the one I have the best shot at. One of the deer was behind and to the side of the juniper tree, and so I couldn't really see him that well, but the other one was on the side closest to me, and I figured that's the one I'm probably going to shoot. As I got set up, was ready to shoot, looking through the scope, I could see the deer was about halfway inside this bush, this tree there eating. So I didn't have a good shot on him initially, but I figured that he's probably going to do this for another 10, 20, 30 seconds, then step out and turned, and when he turns, I'm going to shoot him. And sure enough, he just read the script perfectly. After a little bit, he stepped out, turned, was almost perfectly broadside to me, right shoulder facing me. I get steady, crosshairs right on his vitals, right on his shoulder. I'm holding a tiny bit forward. We have a little bit of a crosswind, like I said, coming from right to left. So I hold a little bit forward on his shoulder, third of the way up on the body. I had dialed the scope perfectly using the Hornady 4DOF app. So I think I put in 1.5 MOA of elevation adjustment. That should put me dead on there. Hold a little bit into the wind. I needed a 1/4 MOA of wind hold. No big deal. I whispered to James, hey, I'm getting ready to shoot. Squeeze the trigger, boom. Shot breaks, and I can see through the scope, the deer jumps like very surprised and takes a couple steps and just kind of is looking around like, what the heck just happened? Now, the way he jumped initially, it made me think that I hit him. But as I continued to watch him over the next 5 or 10 seconds, I began to think that he was more confused and surprised by the sound of that bullet whizzing by him than actually injured. And as I evaluated the situation, as I continued to watch him, I didn't think that I hit him. No worries. Got a perfectly stable setup here. He's not very agitated. He turned from broadside to almost perfectly facing me after just taking a couple steps. So the range was almost identical. I'd cycled the bolt. I'm ready to go, and I put the crosshairs on his chest. So remember, he's facing me straight on. Put the crosshairs about a third to the halfway up his chest. Hold tiny bit to the right on his body. Squeeze the trigger. Rifle goes off. Boom. Falls straight down to the ground. And he kicks there for a few seconds. I cycle the bolt again. And so I had 3 rounds in my magazine. I've shot 2 of them, got last round in the chamber, and I just hold steady on him, watching to see what happens. And I said, James, I hit him with that shot. He went down. We're going to wait here and just see what happens with him and make sure he's truly down. I don't want to get up there and have him run away in the meantime. And James and I are both really excited at this point. He's like, Dad, you got him. That's so cool. You got the deer. Let's go get him. And I said, all right, James, I want you to count to 100. I'm going to keep watching him. We're going to make sure he's down. And just count quietly in your head to 100. Okay, Dad, no problem. And I'm watching the deer. He kicks a little bit. And after the next, say, 10, 20 seconds, he gradually goes still and stops moving. And then a little while later, James says, okay, Dad, I counted to 100. I said, all right. He's not moving anymore. I think he's down. And I reload my magazine, top off the whole thing. So now I got 3 more rounds in there. And I look at him, and I just kind of scan the hillside there, and that other deer is still there eating. Like nothing had happened. He didn't even seem to notice that someone had shot twice and killed his buddy with one of the shots. I said, okay, listen, let's very quietly go back to the truck. We're going to get our bags, and then we're going to walk over there, and we're going to butcher that deer, take photos and all that stuff. But we're going to do it all in one trip. Let's get what we need and go get him. Because remember, at this point, we'd only taken what we needed to shoot. So we go back to the truck, drop off one of the tripods, basically everything that we do not need in order to haul this deer out, get both of our backpacks, start walking over there. So I'd marked on Onyx where I shot from, and then using the cool new feature that they have on it, where you basically hold your phone up to the direction of the animal. It'll help you shoot an azimuth to it, and then you can use a function in Onyx to manually enter in a range, like I did in this case. So 330 yards goes along that azimuth, and boom, it drops a waypoint out there 330 yards away. So no having to fat finger it or estimate it or drop a point manually or any of that stuff. So I do that to where we shot from, where I thought the deer was, and then we could also still see him there. But it's like, okay, we're going to drop down this canyon a little bit, come out the other side. That'll make it easier for us. Go down into the canyon, come back up the other side, piece of cake, still see him laying right there. And at this point, we're maybe 150 yards away from him. At this point, finally, that other deer notices what's going on and sees us and meanders off. Not super agitated, but wasn't messing around either. Get up there to where that deer was that I shot, land exactly where I left him. Maybe only 50 yards away from where I plotted his point on Onyx Maps, so that function actually worked pretty darn well and would have been very useful in helping to find that deer if it would have been a little bit more of a complicated recovery and that stuff. But we get up to the deer, land right where we left him. So happy. James and I are hugging each other and giving each other 5-5s. Like, Dad, you shot the deer. That's so cool. I was like, man, that's so cool that you got to be here with me for it. I'm so happy. And I'm looking at this deer, and I do not see any marks on his actual body. And I was like, okay, well, I guess I missed him with the first shot, but then I see a bullet hole in his neck, a couple inches down from his jaw, quite a bit higher than I was aiming. I was aiming in his chest, and I hit him almost straight on in his neck. I was like, geez, man, I must have really knocked the heck out of my scope. Both shots I felt awesome about. Perfect trigger squeeze, rock solid. That reticle was exactly where it should have been on the vitals, especially with a little bit of the wind hold, all that stuff. I felt very confident in my elevation hold on it. I'd verified all that stuff at the range. 330 yards is a little bit far, but I mean, it's not something ridiculous or anything. I'm not shooting 6-8, 100 yards or 1,000 yards. Nothing I hadn't done before. So I felt very confident in all of that setup. I was thinking to myself, my goodness, what the heck happened? I must have just really knocked the heck out of that scope, and it must have been shooting very high, way high, after I fell down on it and knocked the scope out of alignment like that. Then I got to thinking about it. Well, if this deer was standing broadside to me and I hit way high, boom, shoot straight over his back, that deer would have heard that bullet just whiz by his head, just real quick like that, straight over his back. And then when he turned, I hold at the same point elevation-wise on his body, but his orientation was such that a bullet that would have whizzed straight over his back broadside would have nailed him straight in the neck on a straight-on shot, like was the case here. So that was consistent, made me think that I was indeed holding appropriately and made a good trigger squeeze on both of my shots, but the gun was shooting significantly higher than it should have been due to that accident. Now, fast forward a week or so, I go to the range. Scope is indeed shooting way high, and I try to adjust it, and the adjustments are just not quite working right. Like, move it down, and it'll go down, but more than it should have for the number of the amount of adjustment that I put into it, etc. So I think I just damaged the scope, and it's not tracking properly after I fell on it. So that scope is on its way to Leupold right now for some warranty work. Not at all trying to trash the scope. The VX5 is a wonderful optic from Leupold. I just hit it hard. I mean, like I said, like the guy from Home Alone. This wasn't just like dropping it on the ground and just kind of clattered there. It was like almost like throwing it on the ground. I didn't throw it on the ground, but the equivalent of like throwing it as hard as I could onto the ground like that. It imparted some force into it. And that's as good and as tough as those scopes are. That's a level of abuse that it's hard to deal with sometimes. But no worries. Deer's dead. Tag it. take photos of it, and then James and I butcher it together. And he and I are both so happy. I'm so glad we got to enjoy this time together. He was so excited that he got to be there with me and see the whole thing and help in it. And he kept asking me if he was going to get to help cut it up and all that. And I said, oh yeah, definitely, man. So I brought my kill kit out there. So I had gloves and paper towels and a knife and everything. I brought my Meadowlark out that Evan Sambita made for me a couple years ago. We cut that thing up, and I was showing him how to do the gutless method on a deer. Okay, this is how you cut it up. You got to be real careful. Don't get into the guts here. This is how you remove the front shoulder. This is how you take off the rear hams of it. See this ball and socket joint? I brought out my real nice black Ovis game bags, and I'd have James open it for me while I'd lower each quarter into it. So I was giving him a lesson on meat care and the importance of keeping everything clean so it tastes good. We're also doing an anatomy lesson out there. And, like when I was talking about the ball and socket joint for the hips, my mom last year got one of her hips replaced. And so I was like, well, you see, Nana got her hip replaced last year, James. So a doctor cut her leg open like this and cut out this portion of her hip and put in an artificial one so it feels better. And like that really, I saw the light bulb go on in his head, like what a big deal that hip replacement surgery was. And I said, I'm sure he was a lot more gentle than I was doing it, but it's still just a real major surgery like that. So we got all the quarters off of it. Back straps, tenderloins, all the stuff I need to take off of it. Now, I was surprised at how big this deer was in the body. His antlers were not especially large, but both of the deer I've killed in this area have been pretty darn big-bodied deer. I didn't weigh either one of them, but I killed a whitetail back in Texas many years ago that I actually put on a scale. On the hoof, that deer weighed, I think, 188 pounds. Both of these mule deer that I've killed in this area over the years were substantially larger in the body than that whitetail that I killed down in Texas. I don't know what these deer weighed, maybe 200, whatever, but they were a big darn deer, and it was a deal getting all that meat off of them like that. Certainly a lot bigger than the Coues deer I killed a couple years ago or any of the pronghorn I've killed over the years. So we get all this meat off of them in the game bags, all that stuff ready to go, cut the head off. I was not planning on getting a shoulder mount out of this deer. I was just going to skull cap him and take the antlers off when we got back to camp. But I didn't have a saw with me, so just had to cut the head off the old-fashioned way. But it was made easier by the fact that I had a bullet hole straight through the middle of his neck that cut the spine like that. So just cut through the hide and the muscle, whatnot, twist it off, finish getting it off, no big deal. We'll take it back to camp, tagged the way you're supposed to, and when we get home, we'll skull cap it and all that stuff. So I decided I was going to carry all the meat out. James wanted to carry something. And I was like, well, why don't you carry the head, buddy? And he was thrilled with that. So I had everything, all the meat in my Exo K4 backpack on the meat shelf the way you're supposed to. Had it all in game bags and trash bags and whatnot to keep it from making a giant mess. Had a couple other smaller trash bags, put the head in that, got it all tied up nice and neat, put it in James' backpack. Now at this point, we do not have a very long walk back to the truck. Maybe 500 yards, as you actually do it, as opposed to just a laser rangefinder straight across, going down to the canyon, back up the other side. So a little bit of difficulty associated with it, but we're not talking miles and miles here. But we both had pretty darn heavy packs. I had all the meat from this deer. I don't know what that pack weighed, 70, 80 pounds. I don't know. And then James had the head of that buck in his pack. I unscrewed two of the legs off of my Spartan Ascent tripod, attached some trekking pole heads that I had previously bought for it to the top, and then we used those as trekking poles on the way out, like that is designed for. I used one for myself, James used the other. And then we just slowly made the hike out of there. And it was, like I said, wasn't super long, but those were some heavy packs coming out of there. But we took a lot of breaks and whatnot, and I could tell, especially getting up that far side of the canyon, getting close to the truck, James was hurting, man. And he's like, Dad, I need to take a break. And I was like, James is fine. Like, the hunt's over now, right? We got all the time in the world. Let's just get out of here without getting hurt. We'll get back to the truck and get lunch. And we finally make it back to the truck, and I'm pretty tired, but I'm doing okay. But he is smoked, man. And I was like, it was still kind of cold outside, but not super cold at this point. And so we're in that kind of weird in-between zone where you can get really hot or really cold depending on how you're dressed and all of that stuff, especially when you're working hard like we were. I'm like, all right, we get back to the truck. I'm like, okay, are you all right? Like, are you cold? Are you hot? Are you hungry, thirsty, just tired? Like, what can I do for you? Like, he just obviously wasn't looking good. And he just sat down in his seat in the truck and was looking at me. He's like, Dad, I just got to think about how I want to answer that question. I was like, it's okay, man. Like, we're done. I'm going to take you back to the camp and I'll get you something to eat and we'll get your clothes changed, warm you up, whatever we need to do. It's fine. And get the truck packed up and everything. I had some Gatorade in the cooler. I got him one and get back to camp and, make some lunch and everything. And after we got some food and some beverages into him and let him rest for 10 minutes, he was good as new. And, he was running around and, being real excited and just being his normal self again. But I got to thinking about just why he was so smoked. I was like, that head wasn't like that heavy, but this was a pretty big deer. And I don't know what that head weighed, but if he had a 20-pound backpack on relative to his body weight, that would have been about the same as a 200-pound man carrying an 80 or a 90-pound pack out of the woods. So he was pretty heavily loaded down too, especially for someone that's literally never done that before. So he did awesome out there. Like I said, he's a little guy, but he's a tough little guy, and was just giving it everything that he could out there. And aside from his scare that morning where his foot fell asleep and he thought he was getting frostbite, he just didn't hardly complain at all out there when we dealt with some tough conditions. So I was so proud of him of how well he did out there. That hunt turned out to be quite a bit more challenging, mainly due to the weather, than I thought it would be. But like I said, he just took everything that we threw at him and just ate it all up and did great. I'm very proud of him. That was such a great bonding experience that I'm glad we got to share that. I'm glad that I got him out of the truck and had him with me when I shot that deer. I'm glad he got to share in the whole experience with finding it afterwards and helping me butcher it and helping me pack it out. He's been telling everyone since we got home, all of his buddies and all that stuff, that, oh yeah, I shot a deer in New Mexico with my dad and all that. And he's calling that his deer or our deer together. And was asking me what I was going to do with the rack of it and all that. And he's like, I want you to hang it up in your office, Dad, so everybody can see it. So, okay, James, no problem. We'll hang up that rack in my office. Everyone can see it. You can tell everyone what a fun memory and experience that was we had together doing that hunt together, because he was an active and an important participant in that hunt. Now, it's a tough balance to strike with a kid his age, where I want to go full throttle and hunt hard, get up early, just go all day long, come back to camp late at night, and just do it again, get every minute of hunting that I can when I'm out there. But I don't want to burn him out. I want this to be fun for him. Right? It's just more challenging than hunting alone, bringing a 7-year-old kid like that, especially someone that's never done it before. Like I said, he's a very tough and very enthusiastic kid, but he doesn't know anything. And so I got to teach him all of this stuff. And so this was an important experience where I had to keep that in mind and just go a little bit slower, explain everything to him, make sure that he was properly dressed, make sure that he was fed and getting enough water and getting enough sleep and all of that stuff, so that it would be safe and so that it would be fun for him. And in that same vein, I just had to pass off a lot of that knowledge to him that I had accumulated over the years of being in the Army and hunting myself, on like how to stay warm and dry in those conditions, how to spot game, how to keep game from spotting or hearing you. We had to talk about like not slamming the car doors when you got out of it and that sort of thing. How to whisper and talk at a low level when you got game nearby, because believe it or not, that's not something that comes naturally to kids. They got to be taught those things. And most importantly, when you're dealing with just really cold conditions like that, I have to teach them how to dress appropriately, wearing the right clothes, not wearing the wrong clothes, layering and putting and taking on clothes as appropriate, so you're warm, but not so warm that you're sweating and then you get cold later or have to deal with potential for hypothermia or all of that stuff. Now, it starts with having the right stuff, and as every parent who hunts or does a lot of cold weather activities knows, it's tough when kids his age are growing like crazy like that. You buy them something 1 year, and then maybe by the end of the season, it doesn't fit him anymore. And if you're lucky, you get 1, maybe 2 years of use out of it. But otherwise, you're just constantly going through stuff. So he complained that his feet were getting cold on our deer hunts together last year. So I bought him some nicer, not super nice, but nicer insulated hunting boots at the end of the season that, try and strike that balance where you buy them a little bit big for him and let them grow into them, that sort of thing. But luckily I did choose well, and I got him some that were big enough that he grew into them, and they fit pretty well this year. And he still has a little bit of growing room left in him. I also got him some darn tough socks, and he told me several times over the course of the hunt that his feet felt great on this hunt, right? Their feet were comfortable, not pinched or getting blistered or any of that stuff. They were also cool or warm and dry. Now, he is fortunately also close enough in size to my wife that he could wear some of her cold weather gear too. It was still pretty big on him, but it was close enough that it worked, and he has plenty of growing room with that stuff. So I didn't have to go out and buy him a bunch of that stuff too. So I ended up layering a bunch of her stuff with some of his normal clothes. And then, like I said, they got the nice socks, the nice boots, got him some nice gloves, and a nice thick poofy jacket, a stocking cap, all that. He was good to go. Now, in that same vein, this was my first hunt where I really had the opportunity to try out the new boots I bought after my Arizona elk hunt in 2022. Now, like I mentioned in my recap of that hunt, episode 232, I wore a set of my old Army boots and a set of custom boots that I got from Russell Moccasin on that hunt. And I had used both of those boots on a lot of hunts over the years up to that point. Both of them fit great, but they just didn't provide nearly enough ankle support. They didn't have a stiff enough sole, and they weren't insulated enough for use in really cold conditions. So they were good for a lot of the stuff I had done up to that point, really for everything up to that point. But that hunt was in such rough terrain, it was so cold that it just was not enough for me. So after that hunt, I ended up buying a pair of Kinatrek Mountain Extreme boots, and they turned out to be wonderful on this hunt. I wore them a lot hiking over the past year, but this was the first actual hunt I had taken those boots on. I'm very happy with how well they performed. They were warm, comfortable to wear, not excessively heavy, and they had had great ankle support, and that was really necessary on this hunt. It wasn't quite as rocky as that Arizona hunt was, but still, there was just rocks out there, and it was just a real ankle hazard if you're not careful and if you're not wearing the right boots. Not a problem at all on this hunt, though. Could not ask for anything better out of my socks, also darn tough socks, and those Kinatrek boots. So probably what's going to end up happening is I'm going to continue to use those Kinatrek boots on the really, really cold hunts or the hunts that are in pretty rough conditions like this. And I'll keep using those Army boots for the hot weather hunts that I do a lot of here in Texas that are on ground that's not nearly as treacherous. Now, like I also mentioned in episode 232, my rifle sling was not up to the task on that hunt in Arizona, especially when combined with my Nosler M21 with a 24-inch barrel and that full-size Banish 30 suppressor. It was a nightmare having to fight that whole setup on the Arizona hunt. But my new Ultimate Firearm Sling was great this year. Really, that whole setup was a massive improvement over what I had last year. That Christensen Arms Ridgeline FFT is wonderful to carry. It's very lightweight, and I like the fact that it has a 22-inch barrel and the fact that the 7PRC still performs well with a barrel of that length in contrast to the 27 Nosler that I used last year, which really needs a longer 24 or 26-inch barrel for best performance. That Banish backcountry was wonderful too. It is an absolute joy to carry that whole setup. It is easily the best carrying hunting rifle setup I have ever hunted with. I bought that Banish backcountry while on the hunt in Arizona, and I was thrilled with how it performed. If you'd want just one suppressor that performs well, both in the sound and recoil mitigation departments, that's also great to carry, the Banish backcountry is the one for you. Now, in that bigger configuration, especially in that 9-inch configuration, the Banish 30 does a little bit better job of reducing sound and recoil, but it's also a lot bigger and just more of a pain to carry. So either use it in the 7-inch configuration when you're doing a lot of your hunting, or go like I did and just get the Banish backcountry. It's a little bit louder, not quite as good at mitigating recoil, but it is much easier to deal with when you're actually hunting and carrying it for miles and miles and miles on your shoulder like that. It's shorter, so it's not getting hung up on stuff. It's just not as awkward on the end of your rifle, all of that stuff. It's a great hunting suppressor. The trade-offs are well worth it, in my opinion. I also really like that Spartan Ascent tripod. It's not very heavy. It's great for glassing. I could mount a camera on it if I wanted to. I could shoot off of it like I did. I could even unscrew the legs to use as trekking poles if necessary. And like I said, that's what James and I did on the hike out. I took one pole and I gave him the other. Now, it's perfect for glassing sitting down, shooting sitting down, or you could even shoot standing, depending on the terrain. but it's not quite tall enough for glassing standing though, and depending on how tall you are, it may be just a little bit too short, fully extended to shoot standing up. That's the only complaint I have about the tripod. Now, Spartan Precision does make a version of that tripod with a little bit longer legs though. I have the mountain version with the shorter legs, but the woodland version of the Ascent tripod is a little heavier, but also taller. And you can shoot standing comfortably off of it, and you can also glass standing off of it too. Once again, I think that trade-off is worth it. And so I have ordered a set of the longer legs, and I will be replacing them with the longer woodland legs on that tripod for most of my future hunts, unless I'm doing something just in absolutely ridiculous terrain where I need a tripod that's as lightweight as possible. Now, like I mentioned a couple times, I used those Leupold BX5 Santium binoculars on this hunt a couple of times, and they actually turned out to be essential for success. Those Vortex 10 power binoculars are great, and I kind of initially identified a lot of animals with those binoculars, but when it came to really zeroing in and figuring out what the deal is with something that looked suspicious, that was maybe a little bit obscured, like those deer were under the tree, or just at longer range, those Santiums were where it's at. I personally don't like messing around with a spotting scope on a hunt. I think the Santiums are a lot better for that, at least in these conditions, with the ranges that I was dealing with and all of that stuff. So that's the route that I went, and those 15 power Santiums were both quite a bit lighter and smaller than all the spotting scopes that I have. Image quality was great. 15 power magnification is wonderful for the situations that I was dealing with. Like I said, essential to this hunt. I've used them. Really, the first time I ever used those binoculars on was my 2017 mule deer hunt in the same unit, and they are perfect for there. I've used them on a lot of other stuff too, but man, they just are awesome in those conditions. Now, my son's 10 power Ride-On 10x42s were also great too. Those are a lower end, less expensive binocular. But man, especially considering what they cost, they're really good binoculars too. Not very big, pretty good image quality, that sort of thing. I was pleasantly surprised with how well they worked out. Now, I also used the new Axel X-Core earbuds on this hunt. They were great. They're actually on sale as I record this. More on that in a second. And my son used the Tracker Blue over-the-ear muffs on this hunt. They were also great. And like I keep saying, this was a great hunt, and it is one that James and I will surely have wonderful memories of for a long time. I could not be any happier with how things went. I would much rather go out and have the experience that I had with him. We had some really good quality time together, build some great memories, and shoot the buck that I did, as opposed to me going out by myself and shooting a giant mule deer. Much rather have it be this way. So this hunt was everything that I could have asked for and more. Now, in the meantime, my next hunt on the schedule is a whitetail deer hunt out here in East Texas. James is joining me again on this hunt, and so will my dad and my brother-in-law. So we'll see how things go with that hunt. You might get a report on it, maybe not. My dad and my brother-in-law have not gotten a chance to hunt yet this year, and since I already have a deer in the freezer, I'm going to kind of sit back and facilitate things for them and maybe try and set them up for success. So we'll see how things go with that. I'm really excited for it, though. I also have some other stuff coming down the pike, too, so more to follow. Now, I have put links in the show notes to where you can see a photo of James and I with our deer. It's on Instagram, too. Follow me at @theBigGameHunter_ if you're not already doing so, if you want to look at it on Instagram. Plus, I also put a link to that born and raised sitting shooting video I mentioned. That's in the show notes, too. Now, Silencer Central is actually running a buy one, get one free sale at this instant as I record this, where you can get a free rimfire suppressor with purchase of certain Banish suppressors. That is the sale I took advantage of in 2022 to get my Banish backcountry, and I could not be happier with how the Banish backcountry or how that little 22K rimfire suppressor that I got have performed for me since then. This is the perfect opportunity to get a new suppressor for yourself if you're on the fence about getting one. Now, Axel is also running a great sale on their X-Cores, GS Extreme, and Tracker Blue Ear Pro right now, too, as I record this. Links to where you can get all of that stuff are in the show notes, right? The buy one, get one free sale with Silencer Central and all three versions of the Axel Ear Pro with the current sale that's going on. You can get a buy one, get one free with a couple of those deals, or just the best pricing overall that you can get with the X-Cores. If you're on the fence about any of that stuff, click the link in the show notes, go check that stuff out, buy one of them right now. this is about as good as pricing as you're going to find for any of that stuff. And of course, links to all of the podcast episodes that I've referenced in the show, and there were a bunch of them, those are also in the show notes too. Check those out if you haven't listened to them already. And also click the link in the show notes, go to huntingguns101.com, sign up there to get my free ebook on the best hunting cartridges and to join my email list at the same time. And please, please, please do me a big favor, hit that subscribe or follow button in whatever podcast app you are using if you enjoyed this episode. And please leave me a rating and review for this show as well. Doing both of those things helps me reach other hunters like you who enjoy this sort of content, and you will also start to receive my new episodes automatically every Thursday when I release them. Remember, you can make your dream hunt turn into a reality, and we can help. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you back here next time on the Big Game Hunting Podcast.
This show may be over, but we have plenty more for you on our website. For more information on today's topic, as well as lots of other useful hunting resources, head over to thebiggamehuntingblog.com. We look forward to having you back for the next episode. But until then, happy hunting.